Just a second. Here we go. She's connecting. Hello. Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm really glad because we both have our outdoor themes going on in the background.
We do, and I think we've got our bee earrings.
Yes, or at least some bee jewelry. I mean,
Yep.
I definitely have some bee earrings too. Oh, that one's a cute one. That's so
Yeah, I like
cute.
yours.
Thank you. Okay, so I've been talking about you. I've been bragging about you and your organization a little bit while we were waiting on you to join. But hello, everyone. My name is Mikailas Ulmer, the founder and CEO of Me and the Bees and the Healthy Hive. And then can you introduce yourself, Doctor?
Sure. I am Dr. Gretchen Laboon. I am the founder of the Great Sunflower Project, and I'm a research biologist at San Francisco State University.
Awesome. So we can start off with Pollinator Week. What do you think is exciting? I mean, Pollinator Week is going on right now. It's started 13 years ago, and every year it's like an even larger movement. But what do you think? How are you going to celebrate Pollinators Week?
Well, I'm going to celebrate by adding to my garden.
Mm-hmm.
You can see behind me, I have a bunch of tomato plants, but I decided I live in California, and this is our drought time of year. So bees have trouble finding flowers and enough resources. So I'm expanding the watered part of my garden so that I can support more bees in their really stressful time.
Got it. I have some tomatoes in my garden too. I have a little baby watermelon, so I'm really excited for that to continue growing. And then we also have some eggplants and things like that. So I'm pretty excited for those to grow. We can make some
Hey,
parmesan.
I don't know if you're a musician, but I have a really fun fact about tomatoes, which is tomatoes are their flowers are really special. If you go look at them, they have sort of this pointy part,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't let their pollen sit out available for any bee. A bee that comes in actually has to vibrate the flower at the right frequency. And so if you go out there and you have like a tuning fork and you touch that tuning fork and it's tuned to
Oh,
middle C
where did
and
it put?
ding
There
it,
we go.
the pollen will go poof out. So it's our musical flower, and the bees actually have to provide the music for it to get pollinated.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get started on your study. My nonprofit, the Healthy Hive Foundation, has been working with the San Francisco State University for just about 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half.
Yep.
And we have partially funded an amazing study. Can you explain some details about that study?
Sure. Let me start by recognizing that this is a study that I did with a bunch of my students, and in particular, Molly Martin, Eric Silva, Zach Portman, a bunch of students from my lab really did most of the work. So I'm like the guiding force, but
Mm-hmm.
they need credit. Um, so the idea was 15 years ago, I had gone and sampled bees up in Napa Valley and Sonoma Valley, north of San Francisco. And at that time, we were really concerned about the transition of lands to vineyard and what was happening with losing oak trees. And so we were interested in what species were there and how they were doing. Um, when Molly came to work in my lab, she was interested in vineyards again. And I thought, wow, we haven't gone back to see how things have changed since we did that original sample. So we had this idea we'd go back and sample. And wouldn't you know, that winter we had the disastrous wildfires that were so tragic here in Northern California. And while it was a real tragedy, it also gave us the opportunity to look at how wildlife responds to wildfire. And in particular, we were interested in whether or not these big wildfires were really having a big negative impact on pollinators. So Molly went out and my other students and have gone back and resampled those exact same sites that we sampled 15 and 16 years ago to see whether or not we see changes in the bee community. And one of the great things about how the fires happened is about half of our sites burned and half didn't. So we could compare how much change had happened in sites that had burned and how much change had happened in sites that hadn't burned. And
Mm-hmm.
that's called the before after control impact design. So you can look at the difference between before and after burning, and you can look at whether or not they were burned or not. So it's sort of the highest standard for science.
Because you get two different areas. One was affected by fires, one wasn't. You can compare it and figure out, like, did fires have an effect on bee populations? So I guess, what were the results? What is something that you learned? And I hear that there's some good news and bad news based on the study.
Yeah, do you want good news or bad news first?
Let's do good news first,
All right.
and then bad news, and then how we can help.
Okay, I'm with you. So the really good news is it turns out that the fires had surprisingly low impacts
Mm-hmm.
on pollinator communities. We did see a little bit of a shift towards bees that are not specialists on particular plants, but in general, we saw the bee communities do really well. There wasn't much difference between the burned and unburned sites, and the fire had very low impact. I partly think that might have to do with the timing of fires because the fires here burned in October. And, what are bees doing in October where you live?
They are not out as
They
much.
are exactly. So we do have ground nesting bees and we have twig nesting bees. So I had expected to see a loss of those bees that nest in twigs because they might have burned up. But we didn't even see a decline in those. So that's all the good news.
Mm-hmm.
The bad news was when we did the comparison between what the bee community looked like 15 years ago and what it looks like now, we saw really dramatic losses in the number of species. Like almost a 30 to 40% of the species were not
Wow.
still there. And that's enough that like it keeps me up at night as a bee biologist and just as someone who loves nature.
I can definitely understand that. And when I saw the preliminary research, like, results, I had that same reaction. I was like, how? I mean, 15 years in the grand scheme of things isn't that long. It really isn't. And the fact that 30 to 40% of the species there are no longer there, like, you couldn't find as much, then that's a little bit disturbing. And then one thing that I'd also like to say is that there are over 20,000 species of bees. One thing that there's a misunderstanding for is that many people think when you say save the bees, it's just honeybees. And there's over 20,000 species. There's ground bees, there's solitary bees. Got a battery warning. Masonry bees. So there's a huge variety, and some of them are endangered. Some of them are doing well and staying afloat. But I think it's really interesting how you're studied a variety of wild and native bees as well.
Yeah. In here in the United States, we actually have over 4,000 species of the 20,000 that are found in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And in California, we have 1,500 of those species. So I think these declines we're seeing in California probably reflect what's happening across the rest of the United States.
Someone just said
The other,
20,000.
go ahead. Yeah.
Someone just commented like 20,000. So yeah, 20,000.
I'll tell you a funny story about me. When I decided to go back, I was pretty sure I wanted to be an ecologist and study the relationship between plants and animals in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I really thought I was going to study fish. And I took a class on ecology, and the instructor started talking about how bees match their flowers and that there are all these species of bees. And I had been a lifelong gardener, and I did not know that there was more than I thought everything was a honeybee. And I was so surprised by this that I went and found him afterwards, and I'm like, I need to know more about this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually how I ended up being an entomologist, was running into James Thompson and being like, I can't believe what you just told me in class today.
I got interested in the bees because I got stung by two of them, which is pretty surprising.
Yeah.
Got stung in my ear and stung on my neck when I was 4, and decided to do a little bit of research on them. And doing that research, I learned that they're really important and that they're also dying at an alarming rate.
Yeah.
A little bit of background noise.
You know, that's a nice story of resilience, though. Most people, I think, if they were stung by two bees, would be like, I'm never having anything to do with that again.
And that
And
was
I
my initial
really
reaction.
like that you were like, I'm going to go figure out about these things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so from the research, bad news was you learned that there was a decrease in bee species variety. What do you think the cause of that was?
You know, I think that's something that we're going to try and figure out over the next couple of years. I have a couple hypotheses. Let me say one background thing. The Sonoma Valley and Napa Valley are valleys that haven't changed that much over the last 15 years. They're places that wine grapes are grown, and they've been pretty stable in terms of how much agriculture is there. So a lot of places where we see declines in bees, we think it's because there's been a real change in what's happening. There's been a lot of land that's converted to agriculture or to houses, but this is not an area like that. So my hypotheses right now are one, that there's some change in farming practices, like the use of a new pesticide. And during this
Mm-hmm.
time, the neonicotinoid pesticides became more prevalent in agriculture. And then my
Yeah.
second hypothesis, oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just saying yes. Like I know.
And then my second hypothesis is California had a big drought during that 15-year break. And that's, you know, probably has something to do with climate change. And we're seeing increases in temperature, you know, temperature trends. And so I'm a little bit concerned that it has something to do with drought and the increasing frequency of drought that's happening
Yeah,
all over.
yeah, that definitely makes sense. So, I'd like to say how people, just quick way that people who are watching can help increase the variety of pollinators. So this study was about the bees, but there are 5 categories of pollinators. There's bees, there's butterflies, there's beetles, there's bats, and there's hummingbirds. And so they're all very important in keeping our food supply up, keeping soil in high quality, biodiversity, keeping habitats running. And many of them are keystone species. So for you guys at home, and what you can advocate for in your communities is there's these things called bee hotels or bee homes. And that's one thing that's at many wildflower centers. I actually have one at my house too, but they're incredibly easy. And that makes you can have bees at your house. And so one of the main things about masonry bees is that they are very docile. They don't really sting, and they actually can pollinate some plants like 40% more than honeybees can. And so it is, you can look online on how to DIY a bee hotel, but it can be really inexpensive. It can be drilling holes into wood and putting paper straws in them. You can also do something a little more advanced and have it where you can observe the bees making their nests and putting leaf clippings in. But what it does is, one, it provides a really nice home for solitary bees and leafcutter bees who are, trying to find a home. And then if you have a garden, or if it's at a community garden, you're going to boost the flowers and buds in that garden too. So that's one really great way that you can help. Another one is community gardens. This is something that is a like group effort, but it can increase awareness about pollination. You get fresh fruits and veggies, which is pretty nice. And it also is another, they call it like pollinator corridors. So it's another place for pollinators to rest a little bit. We can continue with green rooftops or backyard beekeeping, community apiaries. Those are things where there are organizations in your community, and my nonprofit, the Healthy Hive, is trying to promote. We're trying to make it so that everyone learns and can help in saving the pollinators. And so I guess this is a great way to lead into the Great Sunflower Project, which is another way that we're trying to help pollinators. But can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah. A number of years ago, I think it was 2009, 2010, this is right when colony collapse disorder was being recognized, and we
Mm-hmm.
had no idea what was happening. I was really concerned about what it meant to lose a lot of bees. And so the Great Sunflower Project is really focused on that service that bees provide, pollination. So we've got people all across the country doing pollinator counts out in their backyard. So You could turn around and find a flower in your backyard, and I could say start, and you would just count how many different types of pollinators visit that plant for 3 minutes, 5 minutes. You could be a champion and do 30 minutes, and report that online. And then what we do is we calculate the bees per hour per flower.
Wow.
So it's like the speed, it's like your speed limit in your garden of bee visitation. And that lets you know whether or not you have adequate pollinator service where you are or not. And we provide estimates of sort of what the average is in your area and then for your state, so that you can see, you know, do you need to do a little bit of conservation for your bees, or are you doing fine? Together with that, we also have a thing where you can just do a checklist for your garden to see sort of whether or not you have the things we think bees need. And it's a simple survey, and you go through and say, yeah, I have native plants, I don't have native plants, I have a bee hotel, like you were mentioning. And if you don't, you know, we make suggestions at the end of that about how you could improve the spaces that you have.
Got it. That's pretty cool. I definitely would. I have a lot of flowers and sunflowers too that I can go track and, you know, see how many bees per couple of minutes we get. So that's something that I can definitely do. You know, mentioned before, neonicotinoids are, there's been numerous studies on the effects and how they're harmful to bees. One way is that bees pollinate plants that have these harmful chemicals on them. They get into their brain, and the bees either can't find their way back to their hive, if they are living in a hive, or they do find their way back to the hive. They share food because it's kind of a communal organism. That's what a hive is. And other bees in the hive also can get affected. So one way that you can help is by avoiding the purchase of garden products that contain harmful chemicals, so no herbicides, no pesticides. But then you can also advocate for, and there's numerous petitions that you can sign, so definitely do a little bit of research on that, on companies, and you can advocate for the banning of these chemicals in there. And so we did, at least in Texas, we were successful in banning, I think, 4 different chemicals. But there's so many more that that we need to take off the list of things that people can use in their gardens and that we are working for. You can also advocate for cities to put in solar panels or solar roofs. You can advocate for people and companies and buildings to put in solar panels on roofs and parking lots instead of deserts. I learned that from Dr. Gretchen, because deserts are a home to a large variety of bee species, and bees are responsible for 1 out of every 3 bites of the food we eat. So I mean, it's honestly really affecting us as well. And I think that we have a couple questions from the audience too that I thought were pretty good. One are there any fruits or flowers that are better for pollinators? Do you want to pitch in and then?
Sure. I always think about my flower garden as being like my own personal bee zoo, right? And the more different types of flowers that you put in there, the more different types of bees and other pollinators you're going to support. I tend to go for a lot of native plants because the native plants tend to support the bees from your area. So it's like providing them food that they know how to handle, they know what to do with, and that they've evolved with. And so I push for native plants, but you can go into almost any garden center and ask for what the best bee. Some lists on the Great Sunflower Project website, but there are a million lists for every state out there, and you can get that info pretty easily. One thing that I would recommend is when you do go to that garden center, I love that Mikailas mentioned neonicotinoids. Neonicotinoids are used as a seed treatment in a lot of nursery plants. And so I would ask specifically that you want to buy plants that aren't pre-treated with neonicotinoids, because imagine like going into Home Depot and buying a bunch of plants and discovering that you bought plants that are poisoning your bees.
Yeah.
Sort of doesn't help.
And I mean, I think that's something that you have to look into, because there are companies that were doing like campaigns to save the bees, and they were like donating seeds, but the seeds were non-native, invasive in some areas, or were coated in pesticides. So really they were I mean, they had good intentions, but they were
Yeah.
doing more harm than good. So if you take those extra couple minutes, and if you're going to, try to help save the bees, look for, flowers that are native, bee-friendly flowers. For us, it's purple cone flower. We love sunflowers. We have lavender in our garden. So that's pretty fun. And then one other project that we are going to be sharing on our Healthy Hive page is bee balms. They're really fun. It's clay and wildflower seeds. It's a little messy. It's a lot of fun, but pretty much the clay acts as a bond for the seeds. As a bond for the seeds. So you can roll it up. You can do different shapes like hearts and balls, and throw it off of highways. Throw it off of places in your community, and then when the wildflower season comes back, like, it's a sea of wildflowers. And the great thing about it is they drop more seeds, and more each year, more come. So that's honestly one really fun project, and stay tuned for that. If there's any other questions, please comment them down below. I learned a lot, and I also see that a lot of people commented that they learned a lot and they enjoyed this little series. So thank you so much for joining, and I guess we can wait to see if anybody has any questions.
Kayla, this has been so much fun. And, those bee bombs are so much fun to do with kids. So if you have to do some babysitting, it's just a great project for a family to do in a backyard. And there was, if you have a moment, there's an artist down in LA, and I can't remember their name, who actually did that as an art project and threw bee bombs into all these vacant lots to beautify places that had been abandoned.
Wow.
Isn't that a neat idea?
Oh, yes, it is. And I mean, cool. There's some really cool artists who have done murals, gotta say that right, bee murals, etc., for advocating and trying to increase awareness about the bees. So a couple more questions. I think I already know the answer to this one, but you can answer it. Have you done any studies in Arizona?
Oh, I have actually. I did all of my first research in southeastern Arizona, and I go
Wow.
back there every year. Arizona has possibly the highest diversity of bee species in maybe the world, but definitely in North America. And there are spectacular bees there.
Wow. I wasn't actually gonna guess that, but that's pretty cool. One more question is, how can people join the Great Sunflower Project?
Oh, thank you. We have, you can go to our website. It's greatsunflower.org, and sign yourself in. You just have to put an email address in so you can find yourself again. And you could even do a bee count every day this week for Pollinator Week. That could be your personal project.
Nice. And some other cool organizations: Wildflower Boom for people who are in Austin Climate Coalition, Freedom Gardens. But those are pretty cool organizations. They all have social media pages. You can learn more about them, and they are advocating for the increase in pollinators and bees as well. Let's see if there's any more questions before we end this off. When will the
Mikaila,
final...
what are you doing for Pollinator Week?
What am I doing? I'm also going to be trying to increase my garden. I have a goal of I kind of want to make like 20 bee bombs. I think that's pretty good at throwing them out.
Fine.
And then just for fun, I would like to visit the Botanical Garden and Wildlife Center here in Austin, because I actually haven't been in a while, and I really enjoy going through and like looking at the different insects and animals and plants there. And then I'm also going to take some time to find some petitions that I can sign based on, the things that we've advocated for. So putting solar panels on roofs, banning neonicotinoids and products and companies that have neonicotinoids in those products. And then also putting more community gardens up. So I mean, there's a couple things that I'm pretty excited for. Really excited for the bee bombs. We're going to be giving away some bee products on our Instagram and doing some more Be Fearless interviews. This is the first episode of Be Fearless. So I guess you're like our first guest.
Yay!
Doing some more Be Fearless interviews this week, and then also for weeks to come. Okay.
Sounds great.
So thank you everybody for joining. Please if I saw some more questions that we didn't get time to answer today because this is a quick 30-minute interview, but they're pretty good. Oh, actually, they're pretty good. When will the final study be published, and what is the status of it? That was a really good one that I wanted to.
That's a great question. So we have written the paper up, and the process of science is that we submit that for publication, and we'll probably submit it about a month from now. And then it can take 1 to 3 months for other scientists to read through it and sort of check our data to make sure that they agree with our conclusions, and it'll be out at that point. And we'll put a press release out then, and we'll share it with Mikailas so that she can spread the word, and all of you can read it.
Perfect. So we have some preliminary data that's going to be out in the Pollinator Week press release, and then the final data, which has to be peer reviewed. So we know that it's accurate. We're pretty confident that it is, but that's going to be coming out soon in the near future. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I saw a lot of familiar names and also people who are new supporters. So thank you for joining, and have a wonderful Pollinator Week. I hope you're taking some time to focus on mental health. I know that it can be hard and everything's really crazy right now, but thanks for joining, and I'll see you on the next Be Fearless series. And also, we are going to, I wonder if we announced the winner. Someone on my team may have announced the winner, and if not, I will definitely choose a winner for the lip balm giveaway. Thank you, Miss Gretchen, or Dr. Gretchen Laboon.
Thank you, Mikailas. Be well.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.